DreamWorks is an inconsistent studio. DreamWorks is not in the renaissance we thought they were. Why is DreamWorks still making bad movies? For nearly a year and a half now, comments like these have plagued online discourse surrounding DreamWorks Animation. And I'm sick and tired of it. Hey guys, Grandy Tamaya's here, and today I want to give my 2 cents on the DreamWorks not renaissance problem. So, as a kid born in the late 90s and growing up in the 2000s and 2010s, I've lived through most of DreamWorks' history and watched a lot of their most popular movies and franchises. There were always some that I didn't like as much, and some of them even took some time for me to appreciate. But that never really detracted from my respect for the studio, especially when films like Madagascar had such an impact on me that it sparked my lifelong obsession with animals and natural science, which led me to pursue a bachelor's degree in biology that I earned earlier this year. And while I did watch films from the rival studios too, including Pixar, the matter of consistency between their films was never really a factor in my enjoyment of those as well. I've never cared that most Pixar films have 90-something% on Rotten Tomatoes. That website is f***ing meaningless, and no one can make me prefer something on common consensus alone. But back to DreamWorks, while their lack of consistency has been apparent for about as long as they've existed, it's their output of films in the 2020s that have people so divided. Granted, I haven't seen every film they've put out this decade so far, and there's even some older DreamWorks films that I've never watched, but I've been meaning to watch. So, to make things simpler, I'm going to consider every theatrical release from 2022 onwards, as that was their big return to theaters after the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I have seen all of those. Emphasis on the word theatrical, which means that we can already eliminate one of the bigger talking points about this inconsistency problem. Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. I have not seen this film, nor its accompanying series yet, because I haven't renewed my Peacock subscription, but I've heard they've gotten a lot of hate since initial release. I cannot personally speak on that myself, but that doesn't matter as it's from DreamWorks Animation's television division, not their primary film division. In most cases, the DreamWorks TV shows have creative freedom and aren't canon to the films of their franchises. So, lumping the newer Megamind projects in with the other controversial films that I'll be talking about isn't really fair. Speaking of which, let's talk about those controversial films. There will be minor spoilers for some and major ones for others. I'm going to talk about both of their 2022 films, The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, as one, since they seem to be the source of this Renaissance mentality. Both films, I will agree with the consensus, are great. They're both funny, have talented voice casts, have stylized animation a la Spider-Verse, although that's not important in the slightest, and have emotional story beats that serve as good life lessons for children. More so in the case of Puss in Boots 2, as not only do the themes and drama go as deep as tackling death, it had also been 11 years since the previous film in the Shrek franchise, which was the first Puss in Boots film. And it's largely because of the positive reaction to The Last Wish that we're getting a 5th Shrek movie. This 1-2 punch in 2022 is what I think started the expectation in the minds of many DreamWorks enthusiasts that the studio had to make all of their future films, both on new and old IPs, on the same or similar level of quality. The wiser lot of you might already see the problem with this, but for those who don't, let me explain. Not only was it hasty to start declaring DreamWorks was in a renaissance after only 2 successful projects, it's a pretty arbitrary expectation to hold every new thing up to standards that they were never supposed to reach. Case in point, my favorite film out of this batch, I've made several videos about Ruby Gilman Teenage Kraken, so if you want a more in-depth explanation on why I love this film so much, go watch those. But to keep things simple, this film was the proclaimed death of DreamWorks' short-lived high streak, in part because it was a box office bomb, which is a pretty flawed thing to leverage over this film when the same kind of people who say this also express hatred over the financially successful franchise of the next film on this list. It's hard to say how far this double standard goes, and if these people would be singing a different tune if Ruby Gilman had been a financial success, but besides that, there are multiple other flawed arguments that I've heard as to why people hate this movie. Such as, it's predictable. So what? It's a teenage coming-of-age movie. If you've seen other teenage coming-of-age movies, you'll always run into similarities in that subgenre that make them predictable. That's like saying that slasher movies are predictable because they'll have a final girl. In fact, going back to teen movies, Mean Girls ended up being one of the inspirations for Ruby Gilman Teenage Kraken, particularly in regard to Chelsea's role. There are also some similarities between Ruby Gilman Teenage Kraken and To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which also stars Ruby's voice actress Lana Condor. Complaining about Ruby Gilman being predictable as the teen movie that it is like complaining about Puss in Boots 2 being predictable for having the same story beats as a lot of other heroes' journey stories. No, seriously, think about that for a moment. Puss in Boots The Last Wish uses hero's journey tropes like the hero being pushed to his lowest point, getting called to action to go on a quest along with a ragtag group of companions, and using what he learns to overcome impossible odds. Which are all compounded by the fact that the Shrek universe is a fairy tale world where all of these kinds of story tropes originated. Furthermore, the concept of the protagonist coming to terms with his own mortality isn't even an invention of this film. Ever heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh? It's literally one of the oldest stories humans have ever told. If you have, you could argue Puss in Boots 2 was predictable. Honestly, I think if Puss in Boots 2 tried to go out of its way to be unpredictable to the point of not following the hero's journey, it would not be as loved as it is. But getting back to Ruby Gilman, the teenage aspect might be predictable for someone who's already been through the nightmare of being a teenager, but when you consider that the target audience is children who may want to learn something from this film for when they become teenagers, an older person's ability to predict the film matters much less. The film's villain, Chelsea/Nerissa, also gets criticized for predictability. Admittedly, the trailers could have done a better job of hiding the fact that she was going to become the Titan mermaid that attacks Oceanside. But the implementation of Nerissa was not something that I predicted. Yes, I knew that Chelsea was evil and tricking Ruby. Yes, I also knew that Nerissa was going to play some sort of role after she was mentioned by Grandmama. Not that those bothered me. I did not, however, predict that Chelsea was Nerissa. That plot twist was a surprise to me despite the foreshadowing. And even though I would have preferred the original iteration of this film's concept like in the storyboards, something I have a whole video about, I don't see it as much of a loss on the final product. Oh, and don't give me that whole Ruby Gilman ripped off Turning Red complaint. Even though I still haven't seen that movie and have no interest in it, I can assure you, any similarities are superficial. Besides, it's literally impossible for Ruby Gilman to have ripped off Turning Red because, although there was a year-plus gap between the two films, it takes much longer to create an animated film now, especially a non-sequel, than it did 20-some-odd years ago. Not to mention, Ruby Gilman had been in production since 2017. Whatever the case may be, I will always defend Ruby Gilman Teenage Kraken because not only do I love it and want it to become a franchise, it also gave me a new level of respect for DreamWorks as a whole. And even a year on, there's still a dedicated fanbase who feel the same. Okay, on to the next film, Trolls Band Together. Now, the Trolls franchise has never been particularly loved by the same crowd of people who like DreamWorks' other franchises, despite the first film getting generally favorable reviews. Not that that matters to me, like I said, Rotten Tomatoes is meaningless, and I didn't know the scores for any of these movies until researching for this video. Oh, and there's a reason that I showed the scores of the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies earlier. Despite being a large part of the identity of my YouTube channel, I hear a lot of the same complaints shared between it and the Trolls franchise. Namely that the characters are made to appeal to children in such a way that they end up being annoying, and the hollow use of pop music. Both of which I can, somehow, say as an adult who isn't super big on pop music, I don't have a problem with. Heck, the complaint about the use of pop music is literally the motivation of the antagonist in the second film. Of course, all of this is subjective, but I think the songs in these movies are well implemented most of the time. Even if I'm not always a fan of the songs themselves, I at least have respect for the dance choreography and the atmosphere that the songs bring to a scene. They're not all perfect, but music is the name of the game with these franchises, so I don't think it's right to fault them on that front. And as someone with two younger brothers, who both have ADHD, I know what annoying sounds like, and these ain't it, Chief. In fact, one of the things that I like most about Trolls and Alvin and the Chipmunks is that sometimes the characters do annoy each other. It makes for interesting dynamics between them and how they all work as a unit when they all go on their adventures. Which, in the case of Trolls, is at its peak in Band Together with the theme of family. I could go much deeper with the comparisons, but the solution that the complainers would want would be a catch-22 situation. Yes, you could remove the music, but it would remove one of the things that is important to the franchise's identity, and that would be no fun. What I'm saying is, these franchises are for those who have a taste for them, and there's nothing inherently wrong about that. And in my opinion, the way DreamWorks has handled the Trolls franchise is one of the reasons that I would like them to try their hand at Alvin and the Chipmunks, something I also have a video about. But while Trolls 3 wasn't my introduction to the franchise, it did get me obsessed with it. I've told this story before, but a few months ago, I watched this movie out of sheer curiosity while I was taking a trip to South America. And once I got back home, I rewatched the first Trolls movie, watched World Tour, watched the Beat Goes On Netflix series, and played the Remix Rescue video game, which I'm using as background footage right now. Now that I have a better understanding of this franchise, I find it odd that I didn't get hooked on it sooner, given all the Alvin and the Chipmunks comparisons I just mentioned. I could do a whole video reviewing the Trolls movies, but again, for the sake of brevity, I'll keep things limited to Trolls 3 for now. It does have some plot contrivances, and I can see people calling it predictable just like Ruby Gilman. Again, not that that bothers me, but overall, it's a fun movie. The new characters, especially Viva, are really cool. The new places they visit are vibrant, and even the comedy is improved upon from the first two films. If you liked those, odds are you'll like this one. If you didn't like any of these films, please don't retread complaints with the first two on the third one. Next up is Kung Fu Panda 4, probably the most divisive film out of this batch. While people like me enjoyed the film and think that it at least lives up to the previous two sequels, not that it's necessarily better than those two, others hate this film for a few reasons. I do agree that the Furious 5 were not treated very well, but it's not that my problem is them not being in the movie. I don't think that they would have added anything to the main plot with Poe and Jen, and if anything, they'd have bogged it down. My problem is that they appear in the mid-credit scene with no lines at all because their voice actors were too expensive. The same problem with Lord Shen and General Kai, only worse because the movie already explained the Five's absence early on. So at that point, why were they included at all? They should have been left out of that mid-credit scene and maybe saved for a spin-off film later on, just like Puss in Boots and the Penguins of Madagascar. I also don't have a problem with Jen as a character, or the fact that the film sets her up to be the next Dragon Warrior. I know there's the complaint that the need for Poe to pass on the mantle of Dragon Warrior is arbitrary, but for some reason, I honestly don't care. I think it makes for an engaging character dynamic between Poe and Jen, and I would like to see the films commit to this if they are going for another trilogy like the director has said. I know that seems like this franchise would become Kung Fu Fox, but again, I don't care. Poe can still be the main character even if he's not the Dragon Warrior. So I predict that Kung Fu Panda 5 and 6 will be more about his journey as a teacher. I only hope that DreamWorks doesn't change course from this because doing so could be worse. Essentially the same thing that happened with the Star Wars sequel trilogy. So please, DreamWorks, don't take the wrong message from the criticism of Kung Fu Panda 4. Commit to Jen's ascension to becoming the Dragon Warrior. If the next two films are as good as the fourth one was, I'll be more than satisfied. Finally, there's The Wild Robot, the reason I actually held off from making this video sooner. I wanted to see how the reception to it would turn out and, well, critics are calling it the best DreamWorks film ever made. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but I do think that it's really good. Despite what I said earlier, and many times before about the Spider-Versing of the animation, I do think that it worked well here, or at least it's unintrusive. I don't want to spoil this film as heavily, and it might even be better if I don't. The only negative thing that I can say about this film is that the antagonist, or the closest thing to such, is introduced in what is essentially the start of the third act. And the film is pretty vague on why they're hostile. It's possible to presume why with a little bit of mental work, but it feels a little underbaked for the sake of having a third act fight. Despite that, the film is very emotional, and it nearly got me to tear up twice. My favorite aspect, though, is the setting and ecosystem. Over several seasons, we get to see the forest island change, and Roz even gets plants growing off of her in the latter half, almost as if she's being reclaimed by nature. The voice cast also did really good jobs as well. So yeah, that's all the defense and critique I can give for right now regarding the latest 6 theatrical DreamWorks films. I know I kinda glossed over the bad guys, but I have high hopes for the film's sequel next year. And even though I'm not interested in The Dogman, I might end up seeing that one because my youngest brother wants to, and as I was in the editing process for this video, I took him to Target so that he could buy the first Dogman book, which he read through completely that night. He's also been simultaneously reading the first book for the Wild Robot series. To bring things back to the thesis of this video, I don't blame you if not every single one of the films that I talked about today is to your liking as they were to mine. But don't take it out on DreamWorks. I think the fact that they tried to do something unique with films like Ruby Gilman is very admirable. But if you think that every DreamWorks film, or any animated film for that matter, has to be as good as The Bad Guys, Puss in Boots 2, or The Wild Robot, you are severely limiting your options. And if that's all you care about, just wait for the sequels to those films. It's not like Ruby Gilman was meant to tie you over until then. 2 films every year is a pretty frequent output rate for DreamWorks, so you likely won't have to wait very long for something that you like. Then again, most of my fellow Gen Z people watching this video probably don't have the patience that I do. And if you're a DreamWorks completionist who has to see every film, don't expect perfection or consistency like it's owed to you. It's not. You'll just be setting yourself up for disappointment.
You're a monster! I'm not the monster here, you are! You and the rest of that fairy tale trash poisoning my perfect world.
And in a time when DreamWorks is struggling, we shouldn't be bashing them. We need to support them and show Universal Studios that they need to take better care of their subsidiary. You'd think they'd want to, since DreamWorks was founded to rival the animation studio of their biggest competitor, Disney. But nope. Instead, Universal sabotaged the marketing of Ruby Gilman Teenage Kraken and let it die at the box office in the summer of 2023. And it's unfortunate because, as unpopular as my opinion may be, I want DreamWorks to not only continue the story of Ruby Gilman, but to make new IPs like it. And hopefully a Trolls 4, assuming that recent stuff regarding Justin Timberlake doesn't get in the way of that. I don't need the deepest, most complex story that one-ups everything that came before. I don't need Spider-Verse style visuals. I don't need consistent quality between movies of unrelated franchises. Heck, I don't even need A-list actors. Ruby Gilman had a talented cast of mostly unknown or rising stars aside from Jane Fonda. All I need is a movie that's fun and leaves me with something to chew on. That's what I've always loved about DreamWorks over Pixar. They know when their films are allowed to let loose and have fun. Whereas Pixar feels kinda samey when all they strive to make is high-class art that makes us cry for the millionth time. Hey Pixar, can my tear ducts get a chance to recharge? I mean, DreamWorks is a studio that can tell a story about 4 zoo animals who travel the world and learn that their lives can be more than what they are, and then give an environmental message through a story about a bee that takes honey corporations to court. Nothing about this studio is consistent. And the impact that they've already had on pop culture is something that I think is worth preserving the company for. For crying out loud, Shrek is preserved in the United States Library of Congress. It doesn't get more prestigious than that. Going back to what I was saying a moment ago, I really don't want Universal to do to DreamWorks what Disney did to Blue Sky. But because money talks, Universal would rather prioritize Illumination for the big box office numbers that they bring in over any new IP from DreamWorks that doesn't do the same. So let's stop complaining about DreamWorks being on a downfall, or else they'll actually be on one. Please, they deserve better. Hopefully I managed to give you a new perspective on DreamWorks, but if you still disagree, please be respectful. I know there are quite a few of you who have been following me long enough that you more than likely will agree, but I don't want any war started over it. But feel free to let me know in the comments. Out of DreamWorks' films this decade, which one is your favorite? Have they been treated too harshly by audiences and Universal? And which of their upcoming movies are you anticipating? Like I said, I have multiple videos about Ruby Gilman, and I'm still planning to do a concept art video for it at some point, but depending on how this video does, I might do other DreamWorks videos such as Trolls and Madagascar too. If you want to follow me outside of my videos, my social medias, those being Twitter and Discord, are both linked in the description. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed, have a nice day, and thank you for your time.